Thanks for joining our webinar today. As part of Co's Learn in Lockdown series, today we'll be exploring design for social distancing. So since lockdown started, everyone, our whole team at Code, like our hospitality peers and partners, have been discussing at length about what the new normal would look like for our sector and how COVID will alter the future of eating out. How can our industry address these new health and safety regulations and social distancing? Because as it stands, it seems near impossible. So today we're really pleased to have David Chenery, founder of restaurant interior architecture design firm Object, Space, and Place with us, to really explore how social distancing could be woven into design of restaurants and cafes and really delve into how operators might need to adjust their customer experience in response. So a little bit about David. As well as being a designer, he has also garnered a reputation as a thought leader in restaurant design. And him and his team have been providing support and insights to restaurants during COVID-19. So yeah, we're really, really pleased to have him on board with us today. And finally, before handing over to him, just a little bit of admin and housekeeping. So your mics have been auto-muted and cameras automatically disabled for the session. So can I please kindly ask that we keep them that way? I can see some of our cameras have been turned on. So if you can just turn them off for the session, that would be amazing. And at the end, there will be a Q&A session with David. So please feel free to submit your questions using the chat function. And finally, the session, like all our other webinars, will be recorded and we'll share it with all attendees alongside a copy of the presentation deck as well. So I'll hand it over to David.
Thanks, Roxy. Appreciate that. Always glad to hear my opinions being elevated to insight and thought leadership. So yeah, feeling good about that. Good morning, everyone. I really hope you're all well. I know there's been quite a lot of interest in this subject around how we can just check this is working. Okay, how we can adjust restaurant environments in the face of social distancing. I'm hoping to cover quite a lot of this today. No doubt it's going to raise a lot of questions. If there is stuff you want to talk about afterwards, then hopefully we have enough time at the end to go through a lot of that, and if not, very happy to carry on the conversation offline afterwards. So here we go. Really, there's 5 topics we're going to go through today. The first is the million-dollar question: can social distancing actually work? I think that's very complicated. Then really a question of dealing with strategy over tactics, before we then look at what other people have been doing around the world, how other people have responded to the problem, what's been working, what's interesting. Then really a step-by-step look at what your customer experience may need to do in order to adapt to this situation. And then finally, a kind of inspiring positive note, it's a conceptual project we've developed called Alone Together, which looks at how you could design a fine dining restaurant in the context of social distancing to create a genuinely engaging experience. So the first question: can social distancing work? To be completely honest, it's a very, very complicated question, and I think not made any less complicated by the announcements made by the government yesterday. There are lots of different opinions on this, and they do vary from the yes, the no, and the maybe camp. People who are sitting in the yes camp are people who've managed to develop or already had a hybrid business model. So people that have pivoted into delivery, takeaway, cook at home, all of those kind of examples. There are examples in New York of high-end restaurants who've managed to pivot the fact that people could never get a table in these restaurants and go to a fine dining takeaway service and make $70,000, $100,000 in a week. I was reading about a pub recently, I think it was 2 days ago, and they were saying that since they'd moved to a takeaway model, they were now more profitable than when they were operating as a pub. So I think there are many opportunities around that the hybrid business model that will make things work a bit better and take the pressure off of making social distancing work purely in a bricks and mortar environment. Obviously as well, the convenience-led offers, so the food-to-go guys, they have a natural advantage when it comes to social distancing in that they are more transactional and there is more takeaway, so there's positivity there. And anyone with an outside space, it looks very likely, reading through the guidelines as they've come out from the government, that outside spaces are going to be relaxed as one of the first elements of social distancing that will be looked at. So if you have a large outside space, or even if you have a large inside space, you're certainly going to have advantages over other people. The main negative that's sitting around social distancing is the fact that most people are modelling having 50% plus reduced revenue. From my perspective, I am not here as a designer to tell any business that they should reopen with social distancing in place and they will be able to make a profit without any question. I know UK Hospitality, Kate Nichols, Jonathan Downey are doing a great job of lobbying the government for the National Time Out initiative, along with other elements, to look at what the industry needs in order to survive. It's very clear that more support is needed to level the playing field to make it actually work. Because on a very simple basis, I've seen a number of operators look at their restaurant, do a plan where they take out half of the covers, throw their arms up in horror and run away and say it's impossible. And I completely get it, because I think if you're having to play that game, then it looks like a very difficult circle that you need to square somehow. And linked to that, obviously as a dine-in restaurant where you are an experience-led offer, where you have socializing is the core of what you're about, that throws a big spanner in the works, because social distancing makes that a lot harder to deliver in terms of ambience, in terms of how far you can have people engaging with each other. But then the maybe answer, and it's something we all need to really understand, is that right now we don't actually know what the UK regulations will be. Again, off the back of the announcement last night, I don't know if anybody has read the 50-page document, but I went through it this morning. And the main thing they say is that actually we need to wait for the COVID-19 secure guidelines to be released. So obviously there is indication at the moment that the 4th of July, some hospitality will be able to open, but we're not sure what and in what form. I expect that actually one of the biggest constraints is going to be around capacity that they limit interior covers to be, rather than necessarily spacing between tables at this stage. For example, if they say, like some other countries have done, you're limited to 50% of your covers, then you're simply going to be limited to 50% of your covers, rather than trying to battle to get 1 meter or 2 meter between tables. So as those come out in the coming weeks, we should get a better idea of exactly what we're going to have to work with. But what we have been doing so far is really looking to the rest of the world to see how China and other countries in Asia, as well as parts of Europe, have been doing to try and respond to the social distancing measures. And I guess one key point for that is it's worth clarifying that we call this social distancing, but the reality is it's physical distancing. Nobody wants us to be less sociable. In fact, you could actually argue that we're being more sociable than ever in some ways, in terms of the connection and support we have for each other during this time. So it's really important that rather than looking at the tactics of how you keep people apart, the first thing you do is really analyze what social distancing means for your offer as a restaurant. What do your customers love about you, and how can you deliver the best version of that experience in the context of social distancing? Because the way we look at it is social distancing is effectively a very onerous set of health and safety regulations. And the restaurant and hospitality industry does not let other health and safety regulations get in the way of delivering something excellent for their customers. Yes, these are very onerous. Yes, they are going to be very difficult, particularly for some forms of business, where it makes it they're going to have to make huge numbers of changes in order to be able to deal with them. but we need to look at how we can respond positively to those in a way that will support and even enhance our relationship with customers. I think that's what we are appealing for people to do. As I said already, this has to come in the context, as far as I'm concerned, of government support to help the inevitable financial implications of what restaurants and hospitality are going to have to do to get through this next 3, 6, 9 months. But as it was mentioned yesterday again in the press conference, if this is going to go on for quite a long time, temporary might not be 3 months, it may be 9 months, and it may be 12. And I can't see a situation where the government is going to offer full support to hospitality businesses until such a time when everything's done and a vaccine's in place. So that being the case, people are going to need to find their best way through this. And that's what we want to try and help people to understand and help them make their plans. So back to social distancing. Core principles, I think we're probably pretty up to speed with these. There are two, really: avoiding contact and proximity with people. So you want to avoid contact with surfaces that people have come into contact with, and also keep 2 meters distance away from other people wherever possible. And it is actually that 2 meter distance that it's worth paying quite close attention to over the coming weeks. There is different guidance coming from different people on whether 2 meters is required. In China, for example, in some of the provinces there, they actually ended up with regulations saying you need 1 meter between tables, not 2 meters between tables. And even if you read the government guidance issued yesterday, they're talking about trying to keep 2 meters away and minimizing the amount of time that people spend in proximity. I mean, clearly coming back to the question around will social distancing work, right now for genuine restaurant hospitality, it will not work, which is why all restaurants are closed. But social distancing measures are going to be a sliding scale. And when they reopen, hopefully in some form around the 4th of July, we need to see what they have been scaled back to allow a certain level of social interaction. I've seen some people talking about the problem of a waiter delivering a plate to someone's table in the proximity. It's absolutely right. I mean, you do need to minimize that level of interaction, but the government is not going to allow, as far as I can tell, restaurants to open until that small scale interaction will be safe. So I think we have to assume there's a certain level that will be acceptable. So what have other people been doing? Really, there are obviously some lessons from Asia to be learned. On the left here, we have a shot from a restaurant in China. It's not the most enjoyable scene as they've set out there, the simple use of crosses to stop people sitting next to each other. This to me feels like a very quick reaction, inexpensive design solution to try and make things work. There will be a number of businesses where this level of intervention is going to be what they can afford to do and what will be right for them. But for most people offering experience, this is really not gonna cut it, I think. Interesting to look on the right-hand side here. We've actually got a picture from South Korea. They've obviously had a very much more successful approach to containing the virus so far. So they don't actually have the social distancing measures in the same way, but people are expected to wear masks, etc., when they are out in public. Whether they change some of this in response to the nightclub incident they've had recently, I do not know. Again, looking overseas, other than the spacing challenge we have in terms of trying to keep people apart, the use of screens is something a lot of people have been exploring to enable people to sit closer together but have the divides. I think some of the solutions so far, again, have been very knee-jerk. They are designed to functionally do a job rather than create an engaging experience. I think there will be some interesting things developed over the next few months where we can see some brands who've taken this idea, this functional requirement, and turned it into something that aesthetically sits better within the experience of a restaurant. I mean, for me personally, sitting at that table with perspex dividers around me would not make me want to go back there. I think that's actually another thing to think about as well, is the way I see this is when we come out of lockdown, we're not sure how consumer behavior is going to be. Are people going to be scared? Are people going to be excited to go back to restaurants? I think the most likely scenario is that people will go back to restaurants they're familiar with in the first instance. There's a kind of safety and a comfort, and things they've been missing, whether that's a burger from Honest Burger or a steak from Hawksmoor, or a particular sandwich shop they've been missing going to see in the city. I think you will see people going there first before they then go and see what other people are doing or try a new restaurant out, for example. But the point to make really around this is, it feels to me that every restaurant and hospitality business is going to have a chance to make a first impression again. And again, given that this may be 3, 6, 9 months, can you afford to not make a good first impression? Are you happy to sit back and let that have whatever effect that will have on your business by customers not being so impressed with what you've done? And maybe they go, oh, maybe I'll come back in 9 months when they've gone back to normal, because what they've done so far isn't really working for me. Just a little example on the right here as well, in some of the initiatives that are going ahead in China. So clearly hygiene and visible hygiene is a really important aspect. So this, you see here, someone sterilizing the cutlery and crockery at a table in front of guests. Whether you need to do that or not, I don't know. It's interesting because I think there's a certain level here where what is factually required and what is perceived by customers are not necessarily going to be aligned. I do think there is, because this is such a novel crisis that we're all going through, and a novel situation that we're all having to respond to, we need to be aware that people are not necessarily going to be rational in what they require us restaurants to do in response. Quick example from Pretz, who obviously have reopened a number of their units here. Obviously food to go rather than dine-in, so it's easier for them to make this work. But you can see the kind of plexiglass screens there, which are quite minimal on the left-hand side. They've got collection points for delivery orders, obviously pretty basic shelving they've put in there. Slightly scary signs on the right-hand side, only 6 customers allowed in at a time, which for a Pretz is obviously a massive reduction. And then obviously the fact that their seating area is also closed, which would strike fear into most restaurants. But interesting to see how they have responded to this. The other part is, outside of also the physical restaurant, communication is going to be massively key. Brewdog are always amazing at this, but they've already put out this little movie, which you can, I saw this via James Brown, their retail director, on LinkedIn, but I'm sure you can find it elsewhere. So they've got 10 ways we're making it safer to grab a pint with us. They're talking about their app you can download, talking about how they're going to deal with screens and cleaning. And really, as a restaurant right now, you need to be on the front foot with your communication so that you are front of mind for consumers. Because if consumers come out of this and maybe they only go to 1 restaurant in the first month or 2 restaurants, where are they going to choose, and who is going to be front of mind, and how are you making sure that the customers are going to feel both excited and safe in returning to what you want to show them. This last one is going to be doing the rounds a little bit. I think a lot of people have been excited and interested by this idea. A little restaurant called Mediamatic in Amsterdam was experimenting with how they could make social distancing a more engaging experience for their customers. In fact, I posted this on LinkedIn about a week and a half ago, and it got about 40,000 views. People were quite excited by this as an idea. And this is where I think there will be some people who can do interesting, creative things that turn these health and safety requirements into an engaging experience. Obviously, you've got less covers if you're doing things like this, and you've got the expense of building something. But what is the marketing benefit? What's going to how is your profile going to be raised, and what effects will this have long term for your business? I think there's some really interesting ideas that we can start to look at in here. So just a quick note here before I go through how your customer experience may need to adapt and what you might want to be thinking about. If you go on our website, you can actually download a little PDF. One is social distancing in a food to go restaurant, and one is fine dining. I'm going to take you through the fine dining one now, but if you want to download the PDF separately, you can go and get them. You don't need to give us your email address or sign up or anything. You can just go and take them, and hopefully they will be useful starting points for you. You'll notice we've done food to go and fine dining, and we've kind of left the middle market, partly because we wanted to push to the two extremes, and really a restaurant in the middle will probably have a combination of two of those elements. So, fine dining. Really, before you do anything, I think you've got to think about the booking process. You really need to think about how are people going to come to your restaurant and how are you going to keep them safe. A lot of restaurants, particularly in London, particularly the trendy ones, will have a policy of no bookings. They'll want queues outside. I'm thinking of people like Padella. That is not really going to work for the foreseeable future. Queues are really the enemy of social distancing. Any sort of congregation or any sort of crowding is something you need to avoid. So I think you need to look at how you book people in properly, how you deal with staggering those slots, how you allow for 10-minute gaps between sittings to have disinfection routines. All of that does need to be looked at in a lot of detail. I think some people have suggested that what may happen is that the core dining time of sort of 6 to 10 p.m. or 7 to 10 p.m. will get stretched, as some people will choose to eat outside of peak times, which might not be a bad thing. I think a lot of restaurants would be keen to spread the trade across the day anyway. So if that does happen, that would be great. But you might need to offer incentives to make that happen. And then the last point I'm making here is about the enhanced digital relationship. I think I've touched on it a couple of times already, but I can't emphasize enough how the fact that you have less interaction with your customers in the space of the restaurant and how you can be less sociable and connected in that space means that investing in the digital relationship has never been so important. If you read, I don't know if anyone's read a book called Bespoke by Camilla Laura Sitwell, but she talks about the future of hospitality being about personalization and how hospitality needs to adapt to individual preferences. And part of that, she lays out a 19-step customer journey, the beginning and end of which are both wrapped up in digital communications and marketing. So social media, whether you have an app, how you deal with email comms, pre-visit and post-visit, you need to really invest in those to make the most of every opportunity you have to build a relationship with customers. So once you've booked and you've got people coming in, then great. The first point of contact is going to be the entrance. So what can we do there? If you can install an automatic door opener on top of a manual door, then great, do that, because obviously that means no one has to touch the door at all. If you can't do that, then there are other options. So there are door handles with an antimicrobial finish to them, which look like a regular door handle, but that do not allow viruses to live on them. That's worth looking at. Also, some people may have seen that there are foot-operated openers now, so you can almost get a foot handle where you can open the door with your foot, which is a really good idea. And then really there's material choices as well. So viruses have been shown to live for much shorter times on copper, maybe only 4 hours compared to stainless steel, which is something like 72 hours. These are under lab conditions, so the World Health Organization did say to take some care about interpreting them, but it's still an intelligent move to make. And the other thing with this is whatever you're doing here, these are all good pieces to go into your marketing communications with customers to show what lengths you are going to make sure that they are safe. Also, with the hot weather coming, hopefully you may just be able to simply leave the door open. If your HVAC system can deal with that in terms of its performance, then that would be a good thing to do. And just finally, on the point around minimizing crowds, if you have a single menu display outside your restaurant for people to look at, you might consider putting more of those in so that you give people a chance not to have to gather together. And I'd certainly move them away from your entrance as well, so that you're minimizing people having to stand too close to each other. I guess as you come in through the entrance, then you're talking about your first interaction with staff. And the question of staff and what staff need to be wearing and doing is a very in-depth one. I'm only touching on it here. I think the most operations managers and GMs will be all over this in terms of process and procedure. The question for me, really, the interesting one is around wearing gloves and a face mask. I think a face mask is going to be essential. I think wearing gloves is going to be expected, although, again, if you actually look at the World Health Organization's guidance, they say that hand washing is a better protection than wearing disposable gloves. But what probably comes back here is the question again of customer perception. Will customers be happy seeing members of staff not wearing gloves? I think it's going to be a challenge. Again, how you sit the right side of the line in that regard. But if you are going to do face masks, then please get well-designed versions that feel part of your brand DNA, because they're so visible. I don't think, if you read the document that was put out yesterday, they were quite explicit that there are two types of face masks. There are the surgical ones, which actually do protect from droplets getting out. But these need to be, the supplies of those PPE need to be kept just for the hospitals and for care homes. So you're not likely to be getting hold of those pieces. So therefore, you're left with the choice of fabric face masks, which are going to do a reasonable job of protecting other people from droplets coming out of your nose or mouth. So given that you have less constraints around what that is doing, I think there are many examples on the market of people looking at more interesting designs to those face masks. So I think people not doing that are really missing an opportunity to make an impact there. Having spare face masks for your guests as well is just got to be a good thing to be offering. At the moment, we just don't know whether temperature checks on arriving guests is going to be required. Other countries have. We wait to see what the government will insist on here. I haven't heard anything yet that it will be required, but you need to think about, if you did, how would you have the space to do that in your entrances and your lobbies if you have one? And then really, I think there's another question here about communication. So if you have communicated with your guests in advance, you probably want to make sure your staff are reiterating on entrance what has changed, what is different, what's going to feel a bit odd, make people feel at ease, make sure that they don't feel, if they were concerned, oh God, how do I go to the toilet? Do I have to get escorted by someone? Just make sure everyone knows the procedure so they can relax into the experience as much as possible. Finally, I think we've got hand washing stations and antibacterial gel is going to be a standard everywhere. We definitely need to have that available as soon as people come in through the door. And also there's a question, if you are taking coats and bags, I think you need to explain to guests where these are going. They're going to a room, they don't know where it is. Are you going to disinfect it for them at the end? Just make sure people feel comfortable at every stage. Moving on to the table itself, around the table experience, you do need to make sure your surfaces are both easy to clean and look clean. I'm sticking my neck out a little bit here, but I think I can see over the next 6 to 12 months that there probably will be a visible shift away from distressed timber and distressed finishes to ones that are visibly more hygienic and cleaner, simpler surfaces. You need to make sure that you can make that work. Then the question around tables and separation. As I mentioned, we do need to see exactly what the UK government regulations are going to be, but it is likely to be a combination of a required distance between tables, maybe 2 meters, maybe 1 meter, as a lot of people have done. An enforced policy of reduced capacity, maybe 50%. And then a requirement for physical screening. It is important to remember that if we can use physical screens in the right way, that will give us more flexibility in the layout of covers than if we have to have a 2-meter gap between tables. Another thing you might want to consider if you really want to go all out on the customer safety and health and well-being, there's a company called Air Labs who have a technology called Air Bubble, which is air filtration equipment that links to existing HVAC systems. It removes something like 95% of viruses from the air. Again, if it's, probably would be an expensive technology to put in, but if this is a long-term thing, if this is something we're worried about coming back even as an annual seasonal thing, God forbid, it could be an interesting and useful addition to your fit out. And again, something you can be communicating to guests in terms of the cleanness of the air in your environment. In terms of ordering, I think you need to ensure that tables are only served by one member of staff throughout the visit, as much as that is possible. It all just ties back to that single idea of trying to reduce contact wherever we can. Menus as well should be delivered in an order of preference. So if you can, first of all, through an app on the guest's phone, that would 100% be the best way. I think Mossberger in China have been doing that, and there are other people in the UK who will definitely do that. Obviously, Brewdog mentioned it earlier. If you can do that, that would be great. As a second option, having something digitally projected onto a wall or table or physically mounted on a wall would be your next bet, something that people don't have to handle in any way. And then finally, really, you're looking at printed on a disposable paper that can be recycled. I think in terms of sustainability, we don't really want to be generating paper that's just all going to go to landfill, but if it's something that is from recycled stock and can be recycled, then that would be better. I've seen some people talking about laminated menus that can be cleaned. Personally, I would question how good, high quality that might feel for guests, and whether people will feel that they are being properly cleaned and sanitized. That's something you hold. It just doesn't really stack up for me in terms of customer perception, but some people might make that work. And the other thing really is, because I mentioned this is physical distancing, not social distancing, what can we do to make sure that staff have the training in place to engage customers as much as possible? Is this an opportunity to have a smaller menu, but then staff make more informed recommendations about what's best in the kitchen today, or what they've tried? How can we use the ordering, the weirdness around that ordering scenario to engage in conversation? Because if a member of staff is standing 2 meters away, then you're perfectly able to have a conversation with them and actually still have some form of relationship. There was also something in the guidance yesterday that was talking about how if people are standing side by side rather than front on, that seems to reduce the risk as well. Slightly weird feeling standing next to someone and having a conversation, but again, it might be something we need to look at as the regulations become clearer. In terms of eating and the food, if you can do anything to increase the visibility of a kitchen or food being made, that would be great. Again, perception of hygiene, making sure customers feel safe. What can we do to make that better? You might choose to ask customers if they wish to move away from the table as their food is served and cleared away. Looking at the guidance so far, they mentioned very specifically that it's about duration of proximity as much as anything. I'm fully expecting that a waiter putting a plate in front of me and walking off is going to be a very, very short level of interaction, and I'm guessing that the government won't allow hospitality to open until such time as that level of interaction will be considered safe enough or low enough risk to be allowed. Wine, if you're serving wine, you may leave this next to the table or inform guests they need to top this up themselves. They're not expecting to be looked after in quite the same way. And you could even, for the higher end pieces, you could consider some theatre around the food delivery. Can you have a trolley that the guests unload themselves that's wheeled out to them? Or can you have tabletops that rotate to minimise staff walking around a table? I think these kind of creative ideas that, granted, will cost a certain amount to invest in, they could give certain businesses an edge in terms of customer experience, doing something notable that people want to come back and see. Toilets are a challenge. They are small. They are not necessarily always the most hygienic place in a restaurant. I think any doors need to be dealt with in the same way as others in terms of automatic doors or the types of handles you use. You could look at reducing contact as much as possible. So automatic taps, automatic soap dispensers and hand dryers should be the first thing you do. They're also good, to be honest, in terms of sustainability. So it is a good direction to be going in. Personally, again, for fine dining, I find that the acoustics of automatic hand dryers, particularly the ones that are like jet engines these days, is not great for the customer experience. So that is a bit of a challenge depending on where your toilets are located in relation to your restaurant. So you just need to think about that piece carefully. Urinals, again, need to be selectively closed off so guests don't stand next to each other. And also, if you have an accessible toilet, naturally those are going to be lower risk areas because only one person's allowed in at a time. So you should make as much use of that as possible. When it comes to leaving, payment, similar to menus, should be taken in an order of preference. So if you've got the app, then great, do it through your guest's phone via the app. If not, then we slip down to contactless card payment. Below that, we have a chip and PIN card payment. And then really just the main note is you need to be avoiding cash, including tips. You could look at initiatives like Tip Jar, who have actually a digital version of tipping to avoid that. So that's a good one to look at. And then when your staff are getting people out of the restaurant, look at having a designated one-way system. If you're lucky enough to have a separate entrance and exit, then that's great. You can designate one as a way in and a way out. But your staff are going to have some extra training to just be more aware of how they get people out of the restaurant. You can almost think of this as smuggling a VIP out, or keep them out of harm's way. This might include as well bringing the coats and bags to the table to avoid congregating around an exit. Again, anything we can do to minimize crowding, to keep the journey as seamless as possible, is exactly where we need to be going. Finally, online. I've mentioned this in digital marketing at the beginning, but it's so important I'm mentioning it again here. You need to stay in touch with guests and make sure they're properly followed up after leaving. If we are looking at scenarios where you have 50% less covers, potentially you also have 50% less guests to follow up on. So what can you do to make their experience even more memorable? What can you do to go out of your way to make this something they want to tell their friends about, and maybe even make this special? I've heard a few people looking at how they can actually make the restaurant experience work with less guests around. And I think one of the answers from my perspective is if you are well loved, if you have good brand loyalty and people want to come back and you have less capacity, I don't think that there will be a problem for a number of those to very openly and honestly say, look, we're going to give you a special experience if you come back. Everyone knows that the world is turned upside down right now. So we're going to raise our prices to deliver this extra experience, but we're really going to look after you. And this is a temporary measure whilst we have coronavirus drifting through society. I think you will definitely see some people who will move to a model of that form. But again, just to finish really on the hybrid model piece, coming back to the idea of experience and how you connect with your customers. What can you do? Can you do delivery, click and collect, cook at home meal kits? Some restaurants, Blacklock have got a really interesting kit. Gaucho have been looking at wine. There's so many people who are doing interesting entrepreneurial things. But I think that has got to be an essential revenue stream for most brands and restaurants to look at if they're really going to survive. So hopefully that was useful and engaging for people. Look forward to seeing what your questions are as we get to the end. But I just wanted to finish on this concept that I mentioned, where we looked at alone together. So this was a fine dining concept that we wanted to come up with to address a world of social distancing. So we wanted to look at how we can make this a positive experience if we were to build a restaurant from the ground up. So this is available on our website. Again, you can have a look at the visuals. I'm just going to talk very, very quickly about this. So it's a 3,500 square foot restaurant. You can see there's a few things we've done here. We've looked at bringing in a very generous entrance lobby with hand washing areas. We've got a revolving, skipped all the way through there. Apologies for that. We've got revolving doors around the entrance to keep people apart from each other. We've introduced a good amount of circulation space so that people can move around here without getting trapped down any alleyways. There's generous spacing between tables plus physical screening, example around the bar area. The toilets are individual cubicles, so we've made those a kind of very interestingly designed space. It's very generous compared to what most people would put aside for toilets, but I think this would be an interesting thing to do if you were to design new ones now in the face of social distancing. We've got a separate entrance for deliveries and takeaway, just to, again, reduce the pressure around the entrances. I'm sure a lot of people are looking at this saying the luxury of having 3 entrances to a site, but again, looking at what we can do here. And then we've also, along here, we've allowed a very large glass wall so you can see straight into the kitchen, see what staff are doing, see how your food is being prepared, and generally feel good about all this. So these were the visuals we were looking at. So we've looked very much at a fine dining direction. You can see the use of copper. You can see the reeded glass we've used for the screening. You can still engage with other customers. You can see them. You can see members of staff, but it's feeling like a premium experience. One of the ideas we really wanted to explore with fine dining, the reason it kind of works is for us, if you're really obeying social distancing, what you're doing that as a restaurant operator because you want to look after members of the public. And if we say that privacy is a big part of luxury these days, then how can we bring that sense of privacy and protection into a special experience for your guests? And that's what we've tried to look at here. You can see the main restaurant. We have these translucent curtains around tables, so you can still feel together and part of the social experience, but you are protected at the same time. As I say, we really did this to inspire some debate and conversation with people. We're pushing it as far as we can, and hopefully some people will take some inspiration from that. And just really ending, I suppose, on the conversation around innovation, one of the things we thought about again for Alone Together was that if you've got fewer guests to be served, then you could develop a fine dining takeaway offer, including a beautifully boxed meal, access to the restaurant's music playlist, and a virtual chef's table. So where we have the kitchen behind glass, we can have a chef's table, linked to a webcam that allows for live streaming of cooking demonstrations. Guests that order delivery can then be granted access for an hour whilst they've got their delivery. So they have the opportunity to engage with the restaurant and give live feedback or ask questions. An idea we had at the end. And that was all of that. Hopefully you found that interesting, engaging. I've seen a few questions popping up here. So let's have a look. Roxy, I assume you want me to go straight into having a look at these questions. Let me know if you...
Yeah, no, go ahead. I saw like 4 come in earlier. So if we can just look at those, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the top here, wonder what people's views are on operators collaborating to share one space on different days or at different times to utilize spaces. Could that work? Okay, I guess that's a question for everyone else. I'm not sure if I'd be able to answer that. Wonder what people's views are on operators collaborating to share one space on different days. I think that's interesting. So I guess you're talking about how you can get the most use out of any asset or space that people have. I think that is a really good idea if you can do that, particularly across different day parts that are going to be less well used. Yeah, I think I have to leave that to somebody else to answer in full as an operator. Clearly, I'm not an operator. Adam, are restaurants going to have to, as the norm, have dedicated delivery, pickup, takeaway areas in their restaurants now? I think that's a really interesting question. Even we worked on a development 2 years ago where they were building in separate access for delivery drivers for delivery pickup because they were expecting that to be a big market. I think it's going to be essential, to be honest, and I think how that works front of house with these measures in place is going to be a big issue. If you're a small high street restaurant with a single entrance door and you're doing a lot of delivery, then that is going to cause some definite challenges that people need to look at. And I think obviously this has implications for back of house as well, in terms of how people make their kitchens work for enhanced delivery. Anna Marie, it seems this is going to accelerate a drive to tech, from online menus to tips and follow-up experiences. Is this going to be a permanent change, do we think? And is it a possible silver lining to this whole experience? Yeah, I think that's very interesting. My view on the technology is that technology is always a tool to amplify whatever it is that you're doing, whatever the purpose of your restaurant is. And I think there are always going to be some that are much heavier on tech than others. But I think the blurring between digital and analog experiences will certainly continue. And I do think there will be a ratcheting up in the level of technology that people are using to run their restaurants and reach out and create experiences. So I do think, yes, we will see that particular trend, I think, will speed up, and then there will be lasting effects from it. But I do also think it will depend slightly on what the DNA of the restaurant is, because there are some that are community-focused restaurants. There are some where it's all about the food, some where it's about an innovative experience, some where it's about socializing in the space. So you're always going to have outliers. But I do believe that the general trend is that this push towards digital marketing and having a relationship with customers outside of your space is definitely going to carry on. Oh, got some more coming in here. Hugh. Oh, you're replying to Lisa. Okay, good stuff. Lisa, I think that could work for fast casual and middle market where the food is the main event. But for many restaurants, the room and its vibe is even more important than the food. Fair point. Harriet, are most of these measures, i.e. the use of screens / 50% capacity, only viable for larger restaurants, or can they really work for smaller venues too? I think it's a massively important question, and I think that's why the first thing I was trying to say is strategy over tactics. You need to understand why people love your restaurant and what works. If you are Cricket in London and you are a counter-based offer and everyone was within 10 centimetres of each other all the time, then this is going to pose a bigger challenge than if you are a restaurant with quite a lot of space inside or big outdoor spaces. So I really think it's almost going to be a case-by-case basis that people need to understand what's right for them. And if you can't work with capacity reduced in that way, then if you're going to survive and government financial support isn't going to not enough to make you, to help you survive, then you have to look into those hybrid business models of what else can we offer customers? How can we support them? What can we do in their house? What can we send to them? How can they pick stuff up? So that's why I think strategy has to come before you look at the tactics, because I completely agree. There will be some restaurants where that just is going to be so tough that it won't work. Do you think that the restaurant at home experience is a future revenue channel for restaurateurs? Yeah, I definitely do. And I think it's interesting to see what has happened in New York, where some people have found that is a very high demand model. I think particularly ones that have a strong brand where people struggle to get tables. If you can do something that is a step above everything else, then I think it definitely will. To me, it feels like the natural evolution of delivery. Delivery really has succeeded because it is all about convenience in many ways. So if that becomes saturated, the next level above convenience is to offer experience. So that seems like a natural place. And I think there will be some who can make that work and will lead in that direction. But it will also require a certain amount of investment, to be honest, to do that well. It's not something you could just quickly do. I think you'd need to really think about what you're delivering and how you can make that excellent. Do you see operators, sorry, this is from Brendan, do you see operators moving to different sites where the main purposes are square foot for circulation and solely takeaway? I think that's an interesting question, because there's a huge timing component to that. For me, zooming out really far philosophically, my view generally is that human nature is not going to be changed by this. As human beings, we need to socialize, we need to eat. There's many things we crave in order to feel that we have significance in how we have our friends, our family, our work, our goals, whatever it is that we need. That doesn't change. But I do think very much in the short term, and definitely in the medium term, I think there will be a change to what people will be looking for. I mean, the reality is, sadly, we will be losing a number of restaurant operators, and there will be, I expect, a glut of properties on the market at better rents than we had before. So I think people will be choosier about them, and I think that those questions about size and location to make takeaway work will 100% be higher up on their list of important aspects to consider. Helena, as is inevitable, lots of office workers won't be returning full time. Do we adapt meal offers to fit the staggered work times, earlier lunch and longer services? Yeah, I think I've heard a few people talking about the concerns here, and I think they're fair. In urban city centres, where they are going to be discouraging people to work for quite a while, and there may be a longer impact of more people choosing to work from home, I think that adaptability is going to be key. It wouldn't be a bad thing if the lunchtime rush was staggered. I think people would find that beneficial anyway, particularly if you're around the hotspots, whether that's Baker Street or Fleet Street or any of those. Sorry, all of my references are London-based. So if anyone is watching from outside London and getting annoyed with that, I apologise, but they're the ones that easily come to mind as we work in London Bridge. John, I think perception for the customer is king. The recycling of air is probably the best form to combat this virus, but the other measures the customer sees go towards reassuring the client. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the government's gone on a lot about science and data and all of that. And I think that's completely the right way to go. But as we all know, as people dealing with humans are not rational. We are irrational creatures. And I think there are a lot of answers to be found in the areas of behavioural science, around managing customers' perception in the best possible way, best genuine, sincere way. If anyone's read a book called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, it's about the power of ideas that don't make sense and logic-proof problems. It's a very, very good book. Also, Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely is a great one if you want to look at. That whole idea around behavioural science. I think there is a lot to be learned around. This is a logic-proof problem, social distancing. We need a solution that is psychological as much as we need one that is logical. So I think we're going to have to wrap up the questions there. I hope that was useful, guys. Do feel free to get in touch. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you like. I think Adam's going to jump on now from Code.
Yep, not Adam, Roxy.
Oh,
that's cool.
Apologies, Roxy.
Thank you so much. That was really insightful. A lot of food for thought for everyone, I think. I wish we could extend the Q&A session, but everyone, you can submit your questions directly to David. We will share the video and the deck with everyone afterwards, as well as his contact details. So you can carry on kind of asking questions between you guys. But yeah,
that'd be great. If anyone needs any stuff, so you can find it on our website or email me, and I'll send across what we've got. And good luck with your journey, guys. It's going to be an interesting 12 months, that's for sure.
Yeah, fab. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.